Shana Tova. I'm writing this sermon right here on Sunday, September 1st, 2024, as my own personal reflections, a journal, with the knowledge that I will deliver it and this congregation will hear it on this Rosh Hashanah morning. Again, I'm writing this on September 1st, 2024. It is a day after we learned about the murder of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, Idun Yerushalayim, Carmel Gott, Almog Sarusi, Alex Labanov, and Ori Danio. Hamas executed them upon hearing the IDF approach their positions inside the tunnels in Rafah, Gaza. And right now, hundreds of thousands of Israelis are currently protesting the government in Tel Aviv, demanding the return of the hostages. We see these signs of slicha everywhere, meaning I'm sorry. And I'm sorry is now part of the public melancholy. And there are thousands of Israelis who will not return back to the south if Hamas isn't destroyed. Many of these Israelis, including the Bedouin Arabs, they want to seek revenge for what happened on that Black Saturday, October 7th. I'm noticing there's a lot of blaming going around. And Israel, once again, is experiencing such mass trauma. The mainstream media, once again, failed to report accurately on this execution, and rather, in their own words, hostages were found dead. Non-governmental organizations continue to approach such apathy about Israel and the Jewish community. Even Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, he couldn't and wouldn't cast blame on Hamas, the sole terrorist group who's responsible for all this carnage. I also noticed on social media, 99.9% of my friends, the Jewish friends, are lamenting this horrid day. The Jewish community worldwide is in absolute dismay. And social media, once again, to prove awful, there are vile and disgusting posts that are celebrating Hamas. In addition, as I am writing, the IDF found Hamas documents in the tunnels, instructing its remaining terrorists to increase the production of photos and video clips showing the hostages in order to create psychological warfare on the Israelis, which is working. And now, I'm writing on Monday, September 2nd. We just watched the funerals of the 6 murdered Israelis. In some of these images, we can't get past the chief Ashkenazic rabbi sitting Shiva with Rachel, Jonathan's mom, the screams from the moms whose daughters were murdered. And just like that, Hamas just released the videos of the shooting of the hostages. And in New York, as we speak, a mob of pro-Hamas protesters are currently setting off smoke bombs and flares at Grand Central Terminal. And we just had a glimmer of hope. We celebrated and cried in joy when the IDF rescued Quaid Farhan Al-Qadi, a member of Israel's Bedouin Arab community. And I remember these images, and something again that I will not forget seeing his entire family run inside the hospital to greet him upon hearing the news of being rescued. But this feeling of joy of saving one life, just like that, it just dissipated. Because right now, on this Monday, late afternoon in September, it feels like October 8th of last year. It's this feeling of anger, it's this feeling of such outrage, it's this feeling of being alone. And our emotions are even more enraged. The pro-Hamas mobs continue to wreak havoc on our streets and the universities. The United Kingdom just announced an arms embargo against Israel. I just heard the most heart-wrenching interview with former hostage of Viva Siegel, whose husband Keith remains in Gaza in the terror tunnels. It's simply maddening. It's cognitive dissonance at its worst. How can any Western government, any democratic government, force Israel to negotiate with Hamas, a terrorist organization? But yet, at the same time, something that would have never happened in any other war in its history, Israel, it's limiting its offensive operation in order to inoculate Gaza's population because of a polio outbreak. And again, the news doesn't get it, arguing that there's a famine in Gaza, while on the other hand, Gazans suffer from significant rates of obesity. And before they murdered the 6 in the tunnels, they nearly starved them to death, something out of the Shoah, before shooting them. Gaza, believe it or not, has more hospitals per square mile than in most Arab countries. Their terror tunnel system is bigger than London's underground, their subway system. And not once did Hamas protect its citizens inside these tunnels during the war. But again, it's this cognitive dissonance. It feels like the world and the West labels Israel as the belligerent participant, directly causing the most grotesque assault on us. And right now, as I'm writing this journal, I am so angry writing the sentence on this Monday in September. Anger is such a horrible emotion. And I stepped aside, I went on the internet, I read the effects of anger while reading medical journals. My brain is in overdrive, and apparently my amygdala and insula are fired up. And I know that I am posting way too much on social media. There are just 16 million Jews in this world, representing 0.2% of the world's population. I want to say that again. We represent 0.2% of the world's population. Yet we are the most targeted. Medieval Europe forced us to live behind the Yud Gaza, behind the Jew gate. They forced us to become moneylenders, and even in the modern period, we begged for citizenship, to be part of a country. We wanted to become lawyers, professors, and doctors. We wanted to work in the government, and yet our loyalties were always questioned. And throughout the 1800s, citizenship was given to us, and then just like that, citizenship was taken away from us. And then we arrived in America. And after 1945, which was the end of the war and the Holocaust, We found a place to live as proud Jews, contributing to this country and franking the world in so many sectors. We created thousands of nonprofits to fortify not just Jews, but so many Americans who are struggling. And we were so honored to be part of the social contract here. And in 1948, Herzl's dream became a reality. We reestablished our indigenous homeland, Israel, making it one of the most formidable and liberal democracies in the Middle East. And just like American Jews, so much of Israel's innovation has made this world a better place. Yet we are experiencing the highest levels of anti-Semitism, 1939 numbers in America and in Europe. And I really thought after the events of October 7th, in my own personal studies, I told my wife, I told my parents right there that I thought I had to change the end of my dissertation, believing that the world would finally wake up and understand what we are against. I believe the world would finally see and understand the pure evil of Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, including all of its terror proxies in Yemen, in Iraq, and Syria, and finally call out the real puppet master, Qatar. And from the bottom of my soul, from the bottom of my heart, I truly believed that universities would finally reject students for a justified Palestine and other anti-Jewish and anti-Israel groups. I also believed that progressive Christian denominations would cast aside their illogical and baseless assessment of Israel and focus on what matters the most in religious life, getting people back in the pews. If only. Because now here is the issue at this moment. There's a growing argument of Jews who believe to self-ghettoize ourselves from the rest of society. The argument for them is simple. The enlightened West has fallen. Even after October 7th and the execution of 6 hostages, this hasn't moved the needle to our side. So many Jews are shouting, "Why should we care about others? Let's shut it down and live and be with ourselves only." And I get it. And this is where my anger and possibly our anger is permeating. And just last week alone, a pro-Hamas individual set a French synagogue on fire. A man wearing a keffiyeh physically assaulted 2 Jews at the University of Pittsburgh. Hunter College in New York, students for a justice in Palestine protested outside of Hillel with a sign saying, "Bring the war home and Hillel go to hell." And even more personally, for my wife and my parents, back in January, we were so proud to say "Hail to the victors." But there were stickers at the University of Michigan throughout this campus saying, "A dead Zionist keeps the genocide away." As my writing now on this Monday afternoon in the first week of September comes to an end, maybe we actually do it. We shut it all down. We think and act only for ourselves, and we only do what's best for us. My amygdala and insula need to get back to normal levels. I understand I'm a rabbi, but I'm also a human being and a Jew. And even Jewish professionals need to pause to figure out how to navigate the storm. And I imagine most of this temple family, they want to take a pause too. And now, I'm back in the present day, this moment, this morning on Rosh Hashanah, 5785, October 3rd. It's time to breathe. It's time to step back and figure this all out. Because without a doubt in my Jewish soul, I do not believe that we need to self-ghettoize and think only for ourselves. And such a rash decision, although I get it and empathize, will only weaken us and not enhance the love of God, Torah, and Israel. Rather, we need to be engaged in the world even more so, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of being in trauma, regardless of Hamasniks in the streets, and the West in utter shambles. And so there are two paths that I firmly believe could reignite our spark. The first, knowing that the majority of the people in this world are good. We need to remember to feel. We need to remember and feel and acknowledge this goodness. There's a great story about Teddy Kollek, the mayor of Jerusalem from 1965 to 1993, arguably one of the greatest mayors in Israel's history. They called him the best builder since Herod the Great. And after being elected 5 times, he retired. And the Association of German Publishers awarded him the annual Peace Prize at the historic Paul Kirsch. This is St. Paul's Church in Frankfurt, which has such deep Jewish roots. The association asked Mayor Kollek to pick someone to present him the award. And Kollek made a shocking choice. He picked Manfred Rommel, who was then mayor of Stuttgart, and most notably the son of the Desert Fox, Nazi Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Mayor Kollek chose Mayor Rommel to make the presentation because he knew if his father was successful in North Africa, he knew what the fate of the Jewish people in Israel, what would happen to them. And then Kollek said the most remarkable words. Who would have imagined then that the field marshal's son and I would meet in peaceful profession of being mayors? Isn't that a symbol of peace, which is our theme here? In the face of fanaticism and intolerance, which marks of our time, there is a need for deep belief in humanistic Jewishness, treating all people with the same respect and the same manner. That isn't always recognized, especially among groups which only think for themselves and overlook the interests of others. According to Judaism, humanity is indivisible. This lesson is so fitting for us this morning. Kollek wanted the citizens of Jerusalem to know that Manfred Rommel was a good person despite his father. And if Kollek could see the image of God in the son of a Nazi field marshal, all the more so for Holocaust survivors, Israelis, and Jews to know that even after the death camps and the murder of 6 million, goodness can overcome hate. We just had to look a little closer sometimes. And Hal Vachomer, all the more so, we can learn from this lesson to subdue the anger we are feeling at this moment. And so after October 7th, We learn that the overwhelming number of people in this world and people in the Birmingham community who believe that humanity can be indivisible. For example, Temple Emanu-El, we received countless emails and phone calls from strangers in the state offering their support, prayers, and love. During this trauma, listening to the voicemails alone made us cry. People out of nowhere called to see if they could show up and protect us. A wonderful person named Chris Cleveland from Locust Fort, who was here last night, sent me an email right after October 7th saying, "It is our calling and responsibility to stand by you and for you. Whatever you need from us in this time of need, we are here to help you." We owe such and personally dedication to ministers Huey Gardner, Tim Kelly, Micah Hudson, and especially Ed Hurley, who embody true interfaith friendship for this temple, and especially for me during this time. I received countless phone calls from teachers and principals in this area who offered their support. They wanted to know how they could best comfort Jewish students in their school. And this is something that I will truly never forget. Mountain Brook Superintendent Dr. Dickie Barlow and his deputy, Amanda Hood, they sat right behind me on a Tuesday evening in early December to bear witness to the screening of the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th so they could empathize. I looked behind them and said, "I know the history of Mountain Brook schools has been up and down regarding its Jewish student body. But being here tonight and seeing the most grotesque film they will ever see speaks volume of their character, empathy, and compassion to the Jewish community." Homes and businesses place blue and white ribbons on their doors, initiated by two congregants, Rachel Mazer and Emily Feinstein. And finally, we saw the emergence of the next generation of the righteous among the nations. A few deserve recognition who put themselves in the public square to support Israel, Jews, and Western values, while not kowtowing to the mob of cancel culture. And when Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Memorial, updates its wall of those who are righteous among the nations, the first three people, without a doubt, in my opinion, should be British scholar Douglas Murray, Senator John Fetterman, and Congressman Richie Torres. And the list of Shem Tovs goes on and on. How could we ever choose to isolate ourselves? On this new year, we strive to remember that humanity can be indivisible. As Rabbi Hillel reminded us, do not separate yourself from the community. And the Talmud again says, for the sake of poor, for the sake of peace, one should sustain the Jews and non-Jews. And now, the second path. We as Jews must take a leading role to save and reignite Western liberal values. The attack on October 7th was not just an attack on the Jewish people. It was emblematic of the war against the West. It was a war against liberalism and the Enlightenment, as demonstrated by the collapse of the ivory tower and in journalism, as demonstrated by the Columbia University students who were readmitted after they took over Hamilton Hall while kidnapping custodians, and demonstrated by the UN, who wants immunity for UNRWA employees involved in the October 7th massacre. During the Revolutionary War, and this is such a great story, John Adams traveled to Amsterdam to procure funds for the American Revolution. In his biography, he found true happiness learning and studying with the Jewish community there. He noted about their emancipated ideas, their ability to understand the nuance of life and to think critically. It's not surprising that Adams enjoyed their company, because these Dutch Jews were the heirs of Mendelssohn and Spinoza, who introduced the concepts of separation of church and state and the God-given right to think freely without coercion from the state or church. Throughout the thousands of years in Jewish history, we have been most successful in religious life and social life in the West. And for us to establish a formal Judaism for the next generation, we need to ensure these values remain a foundational role in our lives. Because if we choose to close the gates, the universities will fall to illiberalism, binary thinking, a curriculum that focuses solely on the oppressor versus the oppressed. If we choose to close the gates, there won't just be a decline in technological innovation, but also in contemporary Jewish life. A central theme of the high holidays is to remember how we can improve our imperfections. And it is true that I stood from this bema in years past, giving bombastic sermons about the current state of our people, pointing fingers and blaming others. And this is something I truly regret. When we face the trials and tribulations of our people, it causes anger. And our liturgy reminds us how anger gets off the path of teshuvah. And so one of the main lessons I took away from October 7th and this first weekend in September is that anger will always be part of life. And sometimes such horrid things, media, social media, you name it, it will utterly cripple our spirits. But to respond to the crimes against our people isn't through anger or vitriol. It's to pause. It's to celebrate. It's to remember to see that good still exists in this world. Reminded by someone as Teddy Kollek. And the second great philosopher and Holocaust survivor, Emil Frankenheim, wrote the 614th commandment. Do not grant Hitler a post-communist victory. And now, with so much permission, we have the 615th commandment. Do not give Hamas or its allies a post-communist victory. They don't decide how we get to live our Jewish lives. They don't get to shape curricula in education. They don't get to define journalism. We do. And we will continue to be in the public square because when we fight for the West and engage, the world is better. We will continue, even in our small numbers, to be in the game because we are not going anywhere. Shana Tova.